Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I wanted to take a second to talk about and actually problematize a little bit a concept that I discuss a lot in my reviews, and is something that I look forward to and that I appreciate in a pocket knife, but you might not necessarily want. That's the idea of a drop shot or fall shot or drop shotty action. First, let's talk about what I mean for a second. This knife right here is the Chris Reeve knife Shabazz, and it is in many ways the opposite of drop shotty. You can certainly configure them that way if you do things just right and wear them in well, but for the most part, this is a knife where once you unlock it, once the lock bar is undone, this is a frame lock, as you understand, you basically have to keep pushing at every stage to make the lock shut. I'm sorry, to make the knife shut. There is no real, although you can kind of, if you really kind of jerk it, you can kind of get it to fall shut. You're really having to kind of fling the blade in there. This is, although certainly a smooth action, it's not an action that is particularly drop shutty or fall shutty. We can compare that on the other side with, for instance, the Grimsmo Norseman here. This is a knife where once I unlock the blade there, so to speak, even the force of gravity is sufficient to make the knife close. And it's awkward because I'm doing this under a camera, but nonetheless, this is a knife that falls shut. Once you disengage the lock, it will 100% close just using the force of the blade, well, the force of gravity on that blade itself. Mind you, it's completely secure. There's no blade play or anything like that. Any knife can fall shut if the pivot's poorly adjusted. You get vertical like this or horizontal like this blade play. Yeah, that'll make it fall shut a little bit easier, but still. You have very nice fall shut action on this. Another example of this might be the 523 here from CKF. It is a beautiful knife, but it has this same drop shotty action, where once you get the liner off the blade, so to speak, it will absolutely fall shut with no concern whatsoever. This is a beautiful fall shot action, except when the knife bounces back open onto the pivot, or onto the detent ball there. North Arm Skaha is another relatively inexpensive, very drop shutty sort of action there. You can see only the slightest of movement is required to get this guy to shut, and the weight of the very thin blade is able to do that. That's one of the things that makes this exceptional. Or the Brian Nadeau Shot by Design Void right here. This is yet another knife that falls shut. But one thing to kind of note is that there are differences. There are gradations here. This isn't a on or off sort of thing. This isn't binary. This is a knife that requires there is a little bit more tension, I think, on the lock bar, and as a result, it does fall shut. There's no question there. And although I wouldn't it became a meme at one point in time. Somebody asked Brian, oh, how many wiggles does it take to close it? Don't be that guy. But nonetheless, I mean, this requires maybe a little bit of wiggling as opposed to this guy, which is more of a finger guillotine, so to speak. And there's always a continuum. Other companies, like, for instance, Alamic. This is the Alamic Knives Whippersnapper here. Alamic is a company that tends to do, their pivots are very smooth, right? But they're not necessarily drop shutty. That's not the way that they try to do things. You can make it drop shut. I mean, you can make anything drop shut if you drop it from high enough at the right angle, right? But at the same time, if I put a little bit of force on this, it will close absolutely reliably. Same thing with the Three Rivers Manufacturing Atom here. The TRM Atom, again, absolutely easy to close, but it doesn't necessarily drop shut. When you unlock this guy, it stays in a nice position here for you. And of course, this is also very common on other budget knives and washes, or bearings here. This is a Civivi X-Arc here that's been actually customized by a gem of a viewer, which amuses me greatly, and the Civivi Shredder here, which again has some elements of drop shutitude, like you can drop it shut, but it is not the same kind of thing. Even though it is a frame or a liner lock knife on bearings, it doesn't do that same drop shut trick. So there is this continuum. And although I tend to present, like for me, I like a drop shut action, right? This kind of thing is aesthetically appealing to me. And I mean aesthetic there in kind of a weird sense, right? It's not a visual thing necessarily, but it's something that brings me joy, even though it has no functional value. In fact, some would argue that it is a functionally less desirable thing. I think the guys from Ferrum Forge, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I know that the Ferrum Forge guys believe that drop shut is actually a bug because it makes it much more difficult to close the knife. It's easier if you've got a flipper tab here, which will stop on your thumb and put the knife in a position where it's ready to drop shut, but a knife like the CKF here, you kind of need, you need a thumbnail, we'll just put it that way, because it will definitely want to drop shot on your finger, and it can actually catch you off guard if you're not expecting an action that smooth. But so there are arguments that actually drop shot is undesirable, that it's something that you don't necessarily want, and, you know, in many ways, for an everyday user, something where it is very smooth, very easy to close, yet at the same time is... what am I trying to say here? Yet at the same time, he's very, is secure. It's not going to accidentally, I mean, I can jiggle this guy a little bit, and it's not going to accidentally thwink down onto my fingers there. So it may not be something desirable at that functional level, right? Day-to-day life. However, at least for me, with a frame lock or a liner lock, and remember that the key difference here is that a frame lock or a liner lock is putting pressure sideways onto the blade. The way that a frame lock works is that this little piece of the frame is going over this way. And so there's a constant sideways pressure. There is a bit of a spring here, a bend into this, making this want to go this way. And so there is pressure against the blade. And so having that drop shot action is in many ways a question of lock bar tension here, how much spring there is there, because if this were super springy, it wouldn't allow the blade to move, right? And also of things like lubrication, also of bearings. There are all kinds of things that lead to that. But aesthetically speaking, it's kind of, I liken it to the sense when people ask me, what brings you joy about this? What's wrong with you? Why are you like this? Who hurt you? It's a good question. For me, it's kind of like a door, right? If like a door in your home. If you've got a door that's like super creaky, you're like pulling it open, it's like... That's the noise it would make, by the way, just so you know. But pulling that door open is not going to be a pleasurable experience. Your first feeling is going to be like, oh, I don't want that. As opposed to something like this, where it's like a perfectly oiled door, where you provide a little bit of force and it comes flying open, and that's a beautiful thing. I like that a lot, personally, aesthetically speaking. I can also, though, very much appreciate the kind of the intermediate level of, like, this is a super smooth knife, even though it doesn't drop shut. So I can do that, and there's something to be said. Actually, a Lamech, I would say, has a unique sort of pivot. It's not, like, physically unique, but the way that their knives are tuned, generally speaking, ends up feeling very glassy. It's very smooth. I wouldn't say this knife is less smooth than this one. It's just differently so. And so there is definitely a joy in that kind of a smoothness of a, you know, of a glassy, smooth opening. Same thing with the TRM or the knives on washes, generally speaking. And then there are the Shabazz of the world, which do provide smoothness, but it's a very different kind of thing. It's a very hydraulic feeling. It's like slowly opening and closing a car door that's, you know, meant to be, you know, super beef. This is something that a lot of folks enjoy too. But for me, I tend to like this. I like this because, well, I don't know. I'm crazy, right? But in the liner lock, frame lock world, this is something that a lot of people have strong opinions on. Some people love drop shut, some people hate drop shut, and some people like something that's very smooth, but not necessarily going to be the finger guillotine you're after. One thing to note, though, is that this doesn't apply to all kinds of locks, right? On a slip joint, that doesn't work really at all. It's a bench-made proper slip joint here. There's no such thing. If you've got a drop shut slip joint, you've got a safety hazard. Same thing with back locks. You can make a back lock kind of, if you use a little, how I usually close a knife like this Spyderco Delica, one-handed, is by kind of flipping it down a little bit like that, but it's not meant to be a drop shutty knife necessarily. And again, you wouldn't necessarily want it to. Then you get things with like a sliding bar style lock. This is the Hogue Knives Able lock, or it's similar to the Benchmade Axis lock, etc. But this is a knife where there is no lock bar. There's nothing pressing against the side of the blade, and so when I let this guy down, it just kind of falls shut here. And this one hasn't been fully cleaned out, but still, this is another example. This Hogue Deca is another example of a sort of drop shut action. Although in this case, actually, one would argue there's no safety issue because your fingers are never in the blade path, right? At no point, except when you're using the knife, and in that case, you're not disengaging the lock, your fingers are never actually in the blade path, so it's completely safe. Same thing with a button lock knife. This is not an automatic knife, by the way. I just want to make that clear. I press the button, nothing happens. It did in that case because I let the blade come out, but this is a very, very exceptionally smooth pivot. I mean, you can see I'm not doing anything to the flipper tab here, and the blade just kind of wants to come out of there. But when you press this button, the knife does drop shut because there's no longer anything contacting the blade except the bearings. Again, there's no blade play here. It's a perfectly smooth knife. It just happens to drop shut because of that button lock. That's one of the many charms of button locks. Compression locks can do something similar. This is the Spyderco Shaman. As a compression lock right in the back here, when I press that tab off to the side, nothing's touching the blade except the washers, and so the knife will fall shut very nicely. And this is one of the joys of a compression lock. And then other locks, this is a weird lock, but it's the Demco Knives 8020, which has an amazing drop shutty action. It just does it with their shock lock here in the back there. And again, this is a knife that completely and totally drops shut, comes open. But again, it's safe because your fingers aren't in the slicing path at any point. So, you know, it's not even... I mean, it's something you can talk about. You can talk about a free dropping action on a button lock, but frankly, if it's not a free dropping action on a button lock, well, that might not be a button lock. It might have some troubles, right? Or it could be an auto or something else. But anyways, that's the idea of drop shut. It's something I like, but that's personal. And it's something you're going to have to decide whether you like. What I would recommend is that you go and you find something even relatively inexpensive that's a little bit drop shutty. A good example of this actually would be the Ontario Carter Prime. One of my good buddies is a huge Carter Prime fan because it is a budget knife. Yet at the same time, it has an amazing drop shut action. Part of that's because the blade is super heavy. Makes it easy, but yeah, so that's an example of a budget, very drop shutty knife, or at least the ones I've handled have been. Or you could go to the Scar Hollow. These are a little tougher to get, and that'll give you a sense of whether you're liking something that's slow on washes, whether you're liking something that's smooth but requires a little bit of force to get it going, or whether you like a full-on finger guillotine. But it's important to remember that no matter what some jackass on YouTube has to say about the matter, this is a personal aesthetic choice. You might like it, you might not, but either way, it's a good idea to figure out what's going to be the best thing for your particular life, rather than letting some jackass's biases guide your desire, what you believe a good knife should be. So anyways, there you go. Oh boy, I hate those YouTubers. Have a good one, everybody. Hope the rest of your day drops open with wonderful possibilities. That was weird, but I'm still hoping it for you. Bye now.